Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe through the shadowy corners of relationships, those places where love twists into something darker, more suffocating. Picture this. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations that should have felt warm, but instead left your chest tight and your throat dry. The air is heavy, almost tangible, like a storm cloud hovering just above your head. You probably won't survive this if you don't learn to recognize the warning signs before they take root too deep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fun to imagine who else is awake right now, navigating their own quiet battles. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by traveling back thousands of years to ancient Mesopotamia, where clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script reveal some of humanity's earliest musings on love gone wrong. Historians still argue whether these texts were meant as moral lessons or mere entertainment, but one thing is clear. They describe power imbalances eerily similar to modern toxic dynamics. For instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh portrays Enkidu's loyalty to Gilgamesh as both noble and destructive, hinting at how devotion can blur into dependency. Imagine sitting cross-legged on dusty ground while a storyteller recites these tales under flickering torchlight. It's easy to see why people might mistake obsession for affection even then, but not all ancient wisdom was so nuanced. In Egypt, papyrus scrolls detail remedies for marital discord, including spells designed to bind a partner to you magically. Quirky? Absolutely. Effective? Probably not unless you count resentment as an ingredient for lasting love. Meanwhile, Roman philosophers debated whether jealousy stemmed from passion or insecurity, laying groundwork for centuries of scholarly inquiry. And speaking of quirks, did you know Romans sometimes used crocodile dung in cosmetics? Yeah, apparently beauty standards back then weren't exactly refined. Fast forward to Greece, where Plato himself weighed in on love's complexities, describing Eros, the fiery, irrational kind, as potentially dangerous when unchecked. He warned against clinging too tightly to desire, lest it consume everything else. It's a sentiment echoed today in advice columns and therapy sessions worldwide. Yet, despite his eloquence, Plato couldn't foresee how future generations would warp his ideas into justification for controlling behavior. Love, after all, has always been messy business, as you drift further into history. Consider how little has changed, and how much remains misunderstood. Ancient texts remind us that humans have grappled with unhealthy attachments since the dawn of civilization. Whether through magic spells or philosophical musings, our ancestors sought answers to questions we still ask ourselves. What does healthy love look like? How do we know when it's gone bad? These queries linger like whispers in the dark, guiding you gently towards sleep. You find yourself lingering in the agora of ancient Athens, where philosophers gather to debate life's greatest mysteries, including love. Plato, ever the intellectual heavyweight, steps forward with furrowed brow and begins a lecture on Eros, the passionate, sometimes chaotic force that drives human connection. Historians still argue whether Plato intended his musings as practical advice or purely theoretical musings, but one thing is certain. He saw Eros as a double-edged sword. On one side, it could elevate souls. On the other, it could cut deep wounds. You can almost hear him now, pacing back and forth, warning against letting desire overshadow reason. But Plato wasn't alone in his observations. His student Aristotle chimed in with more grounded perspective, emphasizing philia, friendship-based love, as a healthier foundation for relationships. He argued that mutual respect and shared virtue should outweigh fiery passion. It's a concept echoed today in modern relationship counseling, though perhaps not as eloquently phrased. Imagine sitting among these thinkers, sipping watered-down wine while they toss ideas around like stones skipping across a pond. Somewhere in the mix, you'd likely hear someone crack a joke about Zeus's endless affairs, because even philosophers need comic relief. Speaking of laughter, did you know the Greeks had a god specifically for mockery? Momus, the deity of satire, would have had a field day critiquing the excesses of Eros. Picture him rolling his eyes at tales of unrequited love or over-the-top declarations of devotion. Oh, sure, He quipped. Nothing says healthy partnership like stalking your ex all the way to Hades. His sharp wit reminds us that humor has always been a coping mechanism when love turns sour. Yet beneath the jokes lies a darker truth. The Greeks also recognized hubris, a toxic blend of arrogance and self-importance, as a major red flag in relationships. This trait often manifested in domineering behavior, leaving partners feeling small and insignificant. Fast forward to today, and you'll see echoes of hubris in controlling tendencies that suffocate emotional intimacy, whether it's demanding constant attention or dismissing boundaries. Such actions stem from inflated sense of entitlement and rarely end well. As night falls over the agora, the stars above seem to whisper reminders of balance. Love, like any powerful force, requires moderation and mindfulness. Without them, it risks tipping into chaos. And so, lulled by the rhythmic chirping of cicadas, you let these ancient lessons guide you deeper into slumber. You wander now into the candlelit halls of medieval Europe, where courtly love reigns supreme, at least in theory. Knights pledge undying devotion to their ladies, penning poetry and performing grand gestures in their honor. But scratch beneath the surface and you'll find a darker truth. These relationships often mask toxic dynamics disguised as romance. Historians still argue whether courtly love was ever meant to be practiced or merely served as an idealized escape from the harsh realities of arranged marriages. Either way, its influence lingers like the faint scent of incense in a cathedral, both intoxicating and suffocating. Imagine yourself seated at a banquet table, watching as troubadours serenade noble women with verses of unattainable longing. These performances glorified obsession, framing it as noble sacrifice rather than unhealthy fixation. "Oh, fair maiden," one might croon, "I would gladly perish for a single glance your way." It sounds romantic until you realize no one's talking about consent or even basic communication. The power imbalance between knight and lady often mirror broader societal hierarchies, leaving little room for genuine partnership. And then there's a peculiar custom of love tokens. Small gifts exchanged to symbolize loyalty. Sounds sweet, right? Well, not so much when they became tools of control. A knight might bestow a ring or scarf on his chosen lady, expecting her to wear it always as proof of his dominion over her affections. If she refused, or worse, accepted another suitor, it could spark scandal or even violence. You can almost picture the scene. Whispers rippling through the hall, judgmental glares cast upon the unfaithful woman. But let's lighten things up a bit. Did you know some medieval lovers used secret codes to communicate? They weave messages into embroidery or carve symbols into wood, creating clandestine languages only they understood. Sure, it's adorable, but also slightly ridiculous. Imagine trying to explain emojis to someone who thinks Zoxo is cutting-edge cryptography. Still, the era wasn't without its wisdom. Religious texts of the time urged moderation in all things, including love. Excessive attachment, they warned, could lead to spiritual ruin, a sentiment surprisingly relevant today. Whether it's texting your partner every 5 minutes or isolating yourself from friends to maintain constant contact, obsessive behaviors rarely foster healthy connections. As you drift off, the flicker of torchlight dances across stone walls, casting shadows that blur the line between passion and possession. You step into the dimly lit theater of Elizabethan England, where Shakespeare's quill has just finished etching the tragic tale of Romeo and Juliet onto parchment. The play unfolds before you, a whirlwind of youthful passion and impulsive decisions that spiral out of control. Historians still argue whether Shakespeare intended this story as a celebration of love or a cautionary tale about its dangers when left unchecked. Either way, it's hard not to see the red flags waving furiously throughout the narrative. Spoiler alert, rushing into anything rarely ends well, especially relationships fueled by hormones and high drama. Picture the scene. Two teenagers meet at a masquerade ball, instantly smitten despite knowing virtually nothing about each other. Within days, they're secretly married, plotting grand escapes, and making life-altering choices without consulting anyone wiser or saner. Sound familiar? It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train is carrying everyone's hopes for happily ever after. Their relationship thrives on secrecy, impulsivity, and an almost imperative need to prove their devotion. a recipe for disaster if ever there was one. But here's the kicker. Shakespeare didn't invent toxic tropes. He simply magnified them. In fact, Renaissance audiences likely saw echoes of their own lives in star-crossed lovers' plight. Arranged marriages were common, leaving many to dream of escaping societal constraints through whirlwind romances. Yet, these fantasies often ignore practicalities like communication, trust, and mutual respect. Instead, they romanticize codependency, framing it as the ultimate expression of love. Cue eye roll. And speaking of quirks, did you know that during Shakespeare's time, audiences would throw rotten fruit at actors they disliked? Imagine hurling a mushy tomato at poor Romeo every time he made yet another reckless decision. "Hey, buddy," you'd shout, "maybe don't stab yourself over someone you've known for 3 days." Alas, such interventions weren't part of the script, leaving generations to ponder consequences of unchecked emotion. Yet amid the chaos, there are lessons worth noting. Friar Lawrence, for all his meddling, tries to advocate for patience and reason. He warns Romeo against rushing headlong into marriage, urging him to slow down and consider the stakes. Of course, no one listens, because who needs advice when you got blind passion? Still, his words resonate across centuries, reminding us that love should build bridges, not burn them. As the curtain falls and the crowd disperses, the weight of tragedy settles over you, easing you towards sleep with sobering reflections on the fine line between passion and peril. You find yourself strolling to the foggy streets of Victorian London, where gas lamps cast flickering halos on cobblestones slick with rain. Love in this era is a tightly corseted affair, bound by rigid social norms and expectations that often stifled authenticity. Historians still argue whether these constraints protected or poisoned relationships, but one thing is undeniable. They created fertile ground for emotional manipulation beneath the polished veneer of propriety. Control games flourish like weeds choking a garden. Imagine attending a lavish ball, where women fan themselves delicately while men exchange polite pleasantries laced with veiled insults. Conversations are choreographed dances, each word chosen to maintain appearances rather than express truth. "Oh, how delightful," a lady might murmur, her smile as sharp as the edge of her parasol, "to hear of your recent promotion." Translation: why haven't you proposed yet? The pressure to conform was suffocating, leaving little room for vulnerability or individuality. And then there's a peculiar phenomenon of calling cards. Small notes left at a potential suitor's door to signal interest. Sounds innocent enough, right? Well, not quite. These cards became tools of passive-aggressive warfare, used to assert dominance or spark jealousy. A man might leave his card at multiple households, ensuring everyone knew he was desirable and untouchable. Meanwhile, women were expected to wait patiently at home, their worth tied to how many callers they attracted. It's like modern-day social media stalking, except with fancier stationery. But let's inject a bit of levity here. Did you know Victorian etiquette manuals had rules for everything, including how long you should mourn a deceased spouse before remarrying? One guide suggested widows were black for 2 years, because apparently grief comes with a strict dress code. You can almost hear someone whispering sarcastically, "Oh, yes," because nothing says moving on like matching mourning gloves. Still, beneath the absurdity lies a darker reality. Emotional manipulation thrived in an environment where direct communication was taboo. Partners resorted to guilt trips, silent treatments, and thinly veiled threats to navigate conflicts, fearing scandal if they spoke openly. Women, in particular, bore the brunt of these dynamics, trapped in marriages where financial dependence left them powerless against abusive behavior. Yet even amid such constraints, some rebelled quietly, finding solace in clandestine letters or coded diaries that told truths too dangerous to voice aloud. As midnight approaches, the fog thickens, wrapping the city in a cocoon of shadows and secrets. The faint echo of carriage wheels fades into silence, leaving only the steady rhythm of your thoughts. Love, it seems, has always been both a refuge and a cage, a paradox that follows you gently into dreams. You now tiptoe into the dimly lit study of Sigmund Freud, where leather-bound books line the shelves and the faint scent of cigar smoke lingers in the air. The father of psychoanalysis sits at his desk, scribbling notes about the human psyche, including its tangled web of relationships. Historians still argue whether Freud's theories were groundbreaking insights or overwrought conjectures, but one thing is clear. His lens on love and toxicity was, well, flawed at best. Picture him leaning back in his chair, stroking his beard as he muses aloud about Eros, the life force, and Thanatos, the death drive, without ever quite nailing how they intersect in toxic partnerships. Freud believed that unresolved childhood conflicts shaped adult relationships, often manifesting as unhealthy attachments. While there's some truth to this idea, his fixation on Oedipal complexes and repressed desires sometimes missed the forest for the trees. Imagine sitting across from him on a plush velvet couch, recounting your latest relationship woes, while he nods sagely, muttering something about penis envy. Yeah, not exactly the most comforting bedside chat. Still, his work laid the foundation for future psychologists to explore attachment styles, codependency, and emotional manipulation with more nuance. And speaking of quirks, did you know Freud once analyzed his own dreams and diagnosed himself with paranoia? True story. He reportedly dreamed of being chased by wolves, which he interpreted as evidence of deep-seated fears. You can almost hear him chuckling nervously, saying, "Ah, yes. Clearly I'm projecting my anxieties onto carnivorous mammals." It's moments like these that remind us even geniuses have blind spots, and maybe shouldn't self-diagnose before breakfast. Yet despite his eccentricities, Freud touched on universal truths about power dynamics in relationships. He noted how people often recreate familial patterns in romantic partnerships, seeking out partners who mirror their caregivers' behaviors, for better or worse. This tendency helps explain why someone raised in a controlling household might gravitate toward domineering partners later in life. Of course, Freud didn't use terms like trauma bonding or emotional abuse, but his observations hinted at mechanisms we now understand more fully. As the clock ticks past midnight, the room grows quieter, save for the occasional crackle of embers in the fireplace. Outside, horse-drawn carriages clatter down cobblestone streets, their sounds fading into the distance. You reflect on how early psychology stumbled through the dark, groping for answers to questions humanity has always asked. Why we hurt the ones we love? How do we break free from cycles of pain? These queries linger softly, like whispers in the night, guiding you toward restful slumber. You step into the polished black and white world of post-war America, where picket fences gleam under a perpetually sunny sky and television ads promise that happiness comes neatly packaged in a two-car garage. The 1950s painted an illusion perfection. Rosy cheeks, sparkling smiles, and marriages as flawless as freshly ironed linens. Historians still argue whether this era's emphasis on conformity stifled individuality or provided stability after years of global conflict. But one thing is certain. Behind closed doors, cracks were forming in a facade of perfect unions. Imagine yourself flipping through a glossy magazine. Its pages filled with articles extolling the virtues of being a dutiful wife or breadwinning husband. Women were expected to find fulfillment in homemaking, while men shouldered the burden of financial success, all while suppressing any emotions deemed unmanly. It sounds idyllic until you realize how unsustainable it was. Couples often live parallel lives rather than truly connecting. Their interactions reduced to scripted exchanges designed to maintain appearances. "How was your day, dear?" became less a question and more a ritual, devoid of genuine curiosity. And then there's a peculiar phenomenon of keeping up with the Joneses, which turned neighborly competition into a national pastime. Families bought bigger houses, flashier cars, and fancier appliances not out of need, but to project an image of prosperity, even if it meant drowning in debt. You can almost picture someone whispering conspiratorially, "Oh, don't tell anyone, but we're barely keeping the lights on." Meanwhile, marital strife simmered beneath the surface, exacerbated by societal pressure to appear flawless. Divorce carried such stigma that many couples stayed together long after love had curdled into resentment. But let's lighten things up with a quirky fact. Did you know Tupperware parties were all the rage during this time? Housewives gathered to marvel at airtight containers, clapping enthusiastically as saleswomen demonstrated how to seal leftovers like they were safeguarding state secrets. Sure, it's kitschy now, but back then it was serious business, a way for women to socialize within the confines of acceptable behavior. Still, beneath the veneer of domestic bliss lurked darker truths. Emotional neglect, gaslighting, and even physical abuse festered unchecked because discussing such issues openly was taboo. Men dismissed their wives' unhappiness as hysteria, while women swallowed their frustrations to avoid rocking the boat. Yet whispers of discontent began to spread, planting seeds for the feminist movements that would soon challenge these restrictive norms. As dawn breaks over suburban rooftops, the golden glow softens the edges of reality, inviting you to drift into sleep with thoughts of how far we've come, and how much farther we have yet to go. You now find yourself in the bustling streets of the late 1960s and 1970s, where tie-dye shirts clash with polyester suits, and protests echo against a backdrop of change. Second-wave feminism is sweeping through society like a tidal wave, bringing long-buried issues to the surface, including toxic dynamics in relationships. Historians still argue whether this movement was more about dismantling patriarchy or empowering individuals, but one undeniable outcome was its role in shining a spotlight on abusive patterns that had thrived in silence for decades. Imagine sitting cross-legged on a shag carpet at a consciousness-raising group meeting, surrounded by women sharing stories of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and control tactics disguised as love. For the first time, many realized they weren't alone. What they'd endured wasn't normal, no matter how much societal norms had tried to normalize it. Books like Betty Friedan's A Feminine Mystique became rallying cries, urging women to question why their worth was tied to pleasing others rather than fulfilling themselves. The air crackled with both anger and hope, a potent mix that fueled action. And then there's a peculiar rise of self-help literature during this era, a genre that exploded as people sought tools to navigate newfound freedoms. Titles like I'm Okay. You're Okay promised answers to complex emotional struggles, though some advice hasn't exactly aged well. Visualize your partner as a child, one book cheerfully suggests. Yeah, because nothing says romance like picturing someone in diapers. Still, these works reflected a growing desire to understand and fix broken relationships. But let's inject a bit of humor here. Did you know that feminists of the time often burned bras not just as protest symbols, but also because they were genuinely uncomfortable? Imagine tossing one into a bonfire while muttering, "Good riddance to underwired tyranny." It's moments like these that remind us how intertwined personal liberation and social progress truly are. Yet amid the fiery rhetoric and cultural shifts, real change began taking root. Shelters for survivors of domestic violence started opening, offering refuge to those trapped in dangerous situations. Laws evolved to recognize abuse as more than a private family matter, paving the way for legal protections we take for granted today. These victories didn't happen overnight, nor without resistance, but they marked turning points in how society viewed unhealthy relationships. As twilight descends over city skylines, neon lights flicker to life, casting kaleidoscopic reflections on rain-slicked streets. You feel the weight of history lifting slightly, carrying you gently toward dreams of resilience and renewal. You glide into the neon-lit living rooms of the 1980s, where big hair and bigger shoulder pads dominate the scene, and television becomes both a mirror and a magnifier of societal dynamics. Pop culture begins reflecting toxic traits in relationships with an almost theatrical flair, thanks to shows like Dynasty and movies like Fatal Attraction. Historians still argue whether these portrayals challenged or reinforced harmful stereotypes, but their impact on public consciousness was undeniable. Suddenly, everyone's talking about obsession, jealousy, and control, often while munching on microwave popcorn. Imagine yourself sprawled on a floral print couch, remote control in hand, as Alexis Carrington delivers a cutting insult that could slice through steel. These larger-than-life characters brought relationship toxicity out of the shadows and onto center stage, albeit wrapped in glitz and glamour. On one hand, they normalized destructive behaviors by making them entertaining. On the other, they spark conversations about what healthy love actually looks like. Wait, you might mutter mid-episode, is it really romantic if he stalks her after she says no? Spoiler, it's not. And then there's a peculiar phenomenon of movie villains becoming accidental role models for red flag awareness. Take Glenn Close's character in Fatal Attraction, whose unhinged behavior served as a cautionary tale about crossing boundaries. Sure, she boiled a bunny, a moment so iconic it spawned endless parodies. But her actions also highlighted how possessiveness can escalate into danger. You can almost hear someone quipping, "Note to self, avoid partners who threaten pets." But let's lighten things up with a quirky tidbit. Did you know leg warmers were originally designed for dancers, but became a fashion staple because people thought they made legs look thinner? It's funny how trends often mask insecurities, much like how some toxic relationships hide behind grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Back then, society seemed obsessed with appearances, from glossy magazine covers to over-the-top wedding spectacles, all while quietly grappling with deeper issues beneath the surface. Still, amid the excess and escapism, seeds of change continue to grow. Talk shows like Oprah began addressing real-life struggles, giving voice to those who felt trapped in unhealthy partnerships. Therapy entered mainstream discourse, replacing stigma with solutions. And though progress wasn't linear, hello, problematic rom-com tropes, it marked a shift toward greater awareness. As the credits roll on another episode of melodrama, the hum of the TV fades into background noise, leaving you to ponder how far storytelling has come in depicting love's complexities. You now find yourself in the early 2000s, seated on a plush studio couch as Dr. Phil McGraw leans forward his trademark no-nonsense stare, dissecting relationship woes for millions of viewers. This era marks the rise of media-driven self-awareness, where daytime talk shows and reality TV bring toxic dynamics into sharp focus and often uncomfortable scrutiny. Historians still argue whether figures like Dr. Phil empowered audiences or oversimplified complex issues, but their influence on public discourse is undeniable. Love, it seems, had become both spectacle and seminar. Imagine tuning in to hear couples air their dirtiest laundry under fluorescent lights, while a live audience gasps and claps on cue. So, Carol, Dr. Phil might say, raising an eyebrow, "You're telling me your boyfriend tracks your location 24/7 because he cares?" His blunt approach cut through denial like a chainsaw, forcing people to confront behaviors they previously excused or ignored altogether. While some critics dismiss these interventions as performative, others credit them with sparking crucial conversations about boundaries, trust, and mutual respect. And then there's a peculiar phenomenon of reality dating shows, which blurred the line between entertainment and cautionary tale. Programs like The Bachelor showcase whirlwind romances that seem more about competition than connection, leaving contestants and viewers questioning what healthy love even looked like. Did anyone really think handing out roses was a sustainable way to build intimacy? You can almost hear someone sarcastically remark, "Oh, sure, nothing says romance like sobbing in a limo because Chad picked Tiffany over you." But let's sprinkle in a bit of humor here. Did you know Dr. Phil once joked about writing prescriptions for common sense? Picture him scribbling RX, "Stop being terrible," on a notepad before handing it to a befuddled guest. It's moments like these that remind us how absurd yet oddly comforting it could be to have someone call out bad behavior without mincing words. Still, beneath the glitz and gimmicks lay kernels of truth. These platforms normalize discussions about emotional manipulation, codependency, and abuse, topics once relegated to whispered confessions behind closed doors. They also introduce phrases like red flags and toxic positivity into everyday language, giving people tools to articulate their experiences. As the camera pans out and the theme music swells, you feel the weight of awareness settling softly around you, guiding you toward dreams of clarity and courage. You step into the glowing, pixelated world of social media, where curated snapshots and endless scrolls shape how we connect and disconnect. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok promise to bring us closer together, yet they often amplify the very dynamics that strain relationships: comparison, jealousy, and control. Historians still argue whether these tools are more blessing than curse, but one thing is clear: they've transformed the landscape of love in ways both beautiful and brutal. Imagine scrolling through your feed late at night, watching highlight reels of other couples' seemingly perfect lives. Beach sunsets, candlelit dinners, and playful selfies fill your screen, each post whispering, "Why doesn't my relationship look like this?" It's easy to forget that what you're seeing isn't reality. It's a carefully edited version designed to impress. Suddenly, doubt creeps in, nudged along by algorithms that thrive on engagement, even if it comes at the cost of emotional well-being. You can almost hear someone muttering under their breath, "Oh, great. Now I need to stage an impromptu picnic just to keep up." And then there's a peculiar double-edged sword of digital communication. On one hand, texting and video calls make it easier than ever to stay connected. On the other, they open doors for misunderstandings and manipulation. A partner might track your location via Snapchat or demand constant updates through WhatsApp, framing their behavior as concern when it's really control masquerading as care. Quirky fact. Did you know some apps allow users to see who's viewed their profile? Cue the paranoia-inducing question, "Why were you looking at my ex's page?" Social media turns minor actions into major dramas faster than you can say muted notifications. But let's lighten things up with a bit of irony. Have you noticed how influencers promote detox teas while simultaneously posting about self-love? One minute they're selling products to fix flaws, and the next they're preaching body positivity. It's enough to make you laugh or cry, depending on how many ads pop up during your scroll sesh. Still, amid the chaos, glimmers of hope emerge. Online communities offer support for those navigating toxic relationships, sharing resources and encouragement from strangers turned allies. Hashtags like hashtag toxic relationship awareness spread awareness, reminding us we're not alone in our struggles. As the blue light of your phone dims and your eyelids grow heavy, the hum of notifications fades into silence, leaving you to ponder the delicate balance between connection and control. You now wander into the shadowy corners of history, where gaslighting, a manipulative tactic designed to make someone question their own reality, has been lurking far longer than its current buzzword status suggests. This insidious behavior didn't just appear in modern psychology textbooks. It has roots that stretch back centuries, woven into stories and power dynamics long before we had a name for it. Historians still argue whether gaslighting was more prevalent in hierarchical societies or simply better hidden, but one thing is certain. Humans have always excelled at twisting truths to maintain control. Imagine yourself in the court of Henry VIII, where whispers of betrayal and intrigue swirl like smoke from burning incense. And Boleyn's downfall, for instance, wasn't just about politics. It was also a masterclass in manipulation. Accusations of infidelity and treason were carefully orchestrated to erode her credibility, leaving her isolated and defenseless. You can almost hear the king's advisors murmuring, "Oh, Porin, she must be imagining things," as they tighten the noose around her neck. It's chilling how easily doubt can become a weapon when wielded by those in power. And then there's a peculiar case of Rasputin, the enigmatic Russian mystic who manipulated an entire royal family with his charisma and cunning. He'd plant seeds of confusion, convincing Tsarina Alexandra that only he could heal her son while simultaneously undermining anyone who questioned his motives. The result? A nation teetering on chaos. All because one man knew how to exploit trust. Quirky tidbit. Did you know Rasputin reportedly survived multiple assassination attempts, including being poisoned, shot, and drowned? If nothing else, the guy was persistent, even if persistence isn't always a virtue. But let's inject some levity here. Picture a medieval knight trying to gaslight his squire. "I never said I wanted roasted pheasant for dinner. You're clearly hallucinating after too much mead." Sure, it sounds ridiculous, but these small-scale deceptions mirror larger patterns of emotional manipulation throughout history. Whether it's denying something you said or rewriting shared memories, gaslighting thrives on making the victim feel unstable and unreliable, even to themselves. Still, recognizing this pattern offers a strange sense of empowerment. By tracing its lineage, we see how deeply embedded it is in human behavior, and how crucial it is to call it out. As candlelight flickers across ancient manuscripts detailing tales of deceit, you feel the weight of awareness settle softly over you, guiding you toward dreams of clarity and resilience. You now find yourself in a sleek, modern laboratory where neuroscientists pore over brain scans and data charts, unraveling the mysteries of trauma bonds, the psychological glue that keeps people tethered to toxic relationships. These bonds are far from romantic. They're rooted in cycles of reward and punishment that hijack the brain's reward system, much like addiction. Historians still argue whether understanding these mechanisms empowers individuals or simply highlights how deeply wired humans are to endure pain for fleeting moments of connection. Either way, science is shedding light on why breaking free feels so impossibly hard. Imagine sitting across from a researcher who explains how dopamine spikes during periods of reconciliation. Those honeymoon phases after a fight create powerful cravings for the next high. Your brain starts associating chaos with love, making calm, stable relationships seem almost boring by comparison. It's as if your neural pathways have been rewired without your permission, leaving you trapped in a loop you barely recognize but can't escape. You can almost hear someone sarcastically quipping, "Oh, great. So my ex was basically emotional cocaine? Perfect." And then there's a peculiar discovery that oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, plays a dual role in toxic dynamics. While it fosters bonding and trust under healthy circumstances, it also deepens attachment even when the relationship is harmful. This means every hug, apology, or promise of change strengthens a bond, no matter how damaging the pattern. Quirky fact. Did you know oxytocin levels spike not only during positive interactions, but also during stressful ones? That's right. Your body might mistake drama for intimacy, keeping you hooked long after logic says to leave. But let's lighten things up with a dash of humor. Picture explaining trauma bonds to someone from centuries past. "Yes, I know he burned dinner again, but his apology came with flowers, so my hypothalamus insists we stay together." It sounds absurd until you realize how many modern relationships follow the same script, albeit with fancier vocabulary. Still, amid the complexity, neuroscience offers hope. Understanding these processes allows us to retrain our brains, seeking healthier connections and setting boundaries that protect our well-being. As fluorescent lights hum softly overhead and the scent of sterile air fills the room, you feel a quiet determination settling within you, a promise to honor both your heart and mind. You drift now into the quiet chambers of history's healers, where ancient remedies and modern therapies converge in humanity's quest to break free from toxic relationships. Across centuries, cultures have developed methods, some mystical, others pragmatic, to mend hearts and reclaim agency. Historians still argue whether these practices were effective or merely symbolic gestures of hope, but their enduring legacy reveals a universal truth. Healing has always been as much about resilience as it is about release. Imagine yourself seated on a woven mat in an herbalist's hut, inhaling the earthy aroma of dried chamomile and lavender, while a wise elder hands you a steaming cup of tea. "Drink this," she says softly, "and let its warmth remind you that renewal begins within." Centuries later, therapists would echo her sentiment, urging clients to nurture themselves first before seeking solace in others. The tools may have evolved, from medicinal herbs to cognitive behavioral strategies, but the intention remains the same: empowerment through self-awareness. And then there's a peculiar tradition of Japanese kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer. Rather than discarding shattered pieces, artisans highlight cracks as part of the object story, transforming flaws into beauty. It's a metaphor for healing relationships, not by erasing scars, but by embracing them as proof of survival. Quirky fact. Did you know some practitioners believe the gold held spiritual properties, infusing repaired items with protective energy? You can almost picture someone smirking. "So basically, I'm adding bling to my emotional baggage?" But let's sprinkle in a bit of humor here. Picture Victorian-era self-help gurus prescribing long walks in nature to restore one's constitution after a bad breakup. Sure, fresh air helps, but imagine trudging through muddy field in a corset, muttering, "Yes, because nothing heals heartache like restricted breathing." Still, beneath the absurdity lies wisdom. Movement and mindfulness have always been cornerstones of recovery. Today, support networks span continents, thanks to technology that connects survivors across cultural divides. Online forums buzz with shared stories and advice, reminding us we're never truly alone. As moonlight filters through gauzy curtains, casting golden patterns on wooden floors, you feel the weight of centuries of resilience wrapping around you, a gentle promise that even the deepest wounds can heal with time. You arrive now at the quiet heart of your journey, where lessons from the past converge into a steady resolve for the future. Here, in this still moment, you gather the threads of history, Ancient wisdom, medieval missteps, and modern insights to weave a tapestry of understanding about toxic relationships. Historians still argue whether awareness alone can prevent harm or if change requires something deeper, but one thing is clear. Knowledge arms you with the tools to recognize red flags before they take root too deeply. Imagine yourself standing on a hilltop at dawn, the horizon painted in hues of gold and rose. Each ray of sunlight carries whispers from those who came before. Plato warning against unchecked passion. Shakespeare cautioning against impulsive devotion. Feminists urging empowerment over submission. Their voices blend like a chorus, reminding you that love should build bridges, not walls. It should uplift, not diminish. You can almost hear them saying, trust your instincts. They've been honed by centuries of survival. And then there's a peculiar comfort in knowing that even flawed systems held fragments of truth. Victorian etiquette guides may have stifled authenticity, but they also emphasize kindness and respect as cornerstones of civility. Freud's theories might feel outdated, yet his work planted seeds for exploring attachment styles and emotional patterns. Quirky realization. Did you notice how every era had its own version of trust your gut? Whether through proverbs, poetry, or pop culture, humanity has always known that intuition is a powerful ally when navigating love's labyrinth. But let's soften this reflection with a touch of humor. Picture trying to explain modern relationship advice to someone from the Middle Ages. No, really, swiping left isn't an act of witchcraft. It's just efficient rejection. Moments like these remind us how far we've come while highlighting the timeless nature of human struggles. Love's challenges may evolve, but its essence remains constant. Connection, vulnerability, and growth. As the day stretches ahead, bathed in soft light, you carry these lessons not as burdens, but as lanterns, guiding you toward partnerships rooted in mutual respect and shared joy. The air feels lighter now, freer, as if the weight of unspoken fears is lifted. You breathe deeply, feeling the gentle hum of possibility ripple through you, carrying you toward dreams of clarity, courage, and peace. The room grows quieter, the edges of sound blurring into a soothing hush. Your thoughts drift slower now, like leaves floating lazily down a stream. The stories of lovers and fighters, dreamers and survivors begin to blur together, their voices softening into a lullaby of resilience. You are not alone in this journey. Countless souls have walked paths much like yours, their footsteps echoing faintly across time. Let your mind wander without effort, releasing the need to hold on to anything too tightly. Feel the rhythm of your breath, steady and calm, matching the cadence of the night itself. Stars twinkle faintly beyond your window, ancient witnesses to humanity's endless search for love and belonging. They remind you that even in darkness, light persists, small, persistent, and unwavering. Now let go. Let the weight of today dissolve into the embrace of tomorrow. Trust that you carry within you all you need to navigate both storms and sunshine. Sleep comes gently, wrapping you in its tender arms, whispering promises of renewal and hope. Rest now, dear traveler. Tomorrow waits, bright and full of promise.